All right, let's jump straight into this one. The Achilles Heel, defeating the deep sea invaders. If you've been digging into Section XI of the war documents with us, you already know we're dealing with an enemy whose tech doesn't just push the boundaries of engineering, it literally rewrites the fundamental laws of physics. Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking the absolute mind-bending science behind the Abyssal Cephalopoda invasion in the year 3000. We're talking about colossal, hyper-intelligent entities from the ultra-pressurized oceans of Planet X who claimed Earth's deepest trenches as their new home. But as we know, they didn't just stay in the Mariana Trench, did they? They operate in our oceans and right up in our atmosphere using these massive biomechanical bioships. So we're going to decode the tactical realities of this war, we'll unpack the insane gravitational mechanics that allow these invaders to move, and more importantly, we're going to look at the fatal physics flaw the human alliance finally exploits to obliterate them.
How does a deep-sea monstrosity fly through the clouds without exploding? Well, that right there is the central mind-bending physical paradox of the invaders' tech. We are talking about extreme piezophilic creatures. Their soft tissue completely relies on internal hydrostatic counterpressure. Basically, to survive, their bodies literally need the weight of 1,000 atmospheres pushing down on them just to keep their cell structures from breaking down into mush. So when they leave the abyssal depths, they pilot these heavily armored bioships that act as giant mobile environmental suits. These suits maintain that hyper-pressurized deep-sea environment internally, which leads to a massive puzzle that baffled human alliance strategists for decades. How exactly does a ship holding that much internal pressure operate in our thin surface air without violently rupturing?
Ocean trenches with a crushing 1,000+ atmospheres of pressure versus the surface atmosphere with a thin 1 atmosphere of pressure. Consider the sheer scale of this problem for a second. Down in their native ocean trenches, the internal environment of their bioships maintains a crushing 1,000+ atmospheres. But Earth's surface atmosphere, it's a comparatively razor-thin 1 atmosphere. Under normal physical laws, bringing a vessel pressurized to 1,000 bar up to a 1 bar environment is kind of like taking a soda can, shaking it 1,000,000 times, and popping the tab. The internal fluids would exert an outward force that instantly exceeds the tensile strength of any standard material. It should trigger catastrophic, explosive decompression. Yet somehow, they seamlessly transition from 6 miles deep in the ocean to just hovering right there in the clouds.
Subatomic crystalline material, an engineered biometal that alters atomic bonds at room temperature to bend localized space-time. Okay, so how do they actually bridge this impossible gap? It all comes down to a radically advanced engineered material called quantum molecular silicon, or QMS. Unlike human tech, the abyssal species harvests ambient ocean silicates and bioengineers them. By manipulating the atomic crystalline bonds of the silicon at room temperature, their reactor cores generate localized, high-frequency metric stress tensors. Sounds complicated, right? But in plain English, they are effectively manipulating the density of space-time immediately adjacent to the bioship's hull. They aren't just building a super strong wall to hold the pressure in, they are fundamentally altering the physics of the space the wall occupies.
Directional space-time warping mechanics. It creates a gravity sink ahead of the vessel, expands space behind the vessel, results in continuous, controlled freefall, and enables instant Mach 3 turns with zero g-force. Guys, this localized space-time manipulation builds into some truly terrifying movement mechanics. They don't use mechanical thrusters to push through water or air like we do. Instead, the QMS network bends the gravitational gradient itself. It creates a literal gravity sink right in front of the bioship and expands space right behind it. This means the ship isn't actually flying or swimming in the classical hydrodynamic sense. It's basically existing in a continuous state of controlled freefall in whatever direction it chooses. And because this gravitational field acts uniformly on every single atom inside the ship, the fluid, the hull, the alien pilot itself, the ship operates under complete inertial dampening. That's exactly how a colossal leviathan can execute an instantaneous 90-degree vector change at Mach 3 underwater while the pilot inside experiences absolutely zero g-force.
1,000. Just keep that staggering number in your head for a second. 1,000 atmospheres. That is the exact hydrostatic pressure these vessels must simulate internally just to keep their pilots from dying. The QMS space-time warping handles how they move, sure, but how does it solve that insane pressure differential we talked about earlier? How on earth does the ship hold 1,000 bar of outward explosive force when it's just hovering in the sky?
The simulated pressure matrix. The answer to that pressure problem is an absolutely awe-inspiring piece of alien engineering. Human alliance scientists call it the hydrostatic neutralization field, or the simulated pressure matrix. Basically, the QMS matrix is embedded right into the living biosilicon hull, and it projects an inward-directed gravitational gradient. It focuses this gravity squarely on the central neural core of the ship.
Essentially, this artificial gravity acts as a virtual ocean. It simulates the overwhelming weight of 6,000 meters of water pressure pushing inward against the biohull, even when the ship is sitting in the super thin air of the upper atmosphere.
Hull stress factors. We've got internal fluid pressure, which is high, artificial inward gravity, also high, and net structural stress, which is 0. The math of their survival is this incredibly delicate balancing act. You have the internal fluid pressure pushing outward with immense force. But to counter it, the QMS coils generate an equally massive artificial gravity field pushing in. Because the ship dynamically adjusts this internal gravitational field to perfectly offset the external pressure drop as it rises to the surface, those two formidable forces mathematically cancel each other out. The result? A net structural stress of exactly 0 across the outer skin. Whether that ship is at the bottom of the Mariana Trench or floating in the clouds, the physical stress on the hull is identical. It's an elegant, flawless system. As long as it stays turned on. Humanity's lethal counterstrike. But here is exactly where the whole dynamic of the war shifts. Humanity, driven up into these high-altitude mountain readouts and forced to rely on subsurface stealth navies, they finally identified this technological marvel. And more importantly, according to Section XI, they realized it was a catastrophic vulnerability. The Human Alliance figured out they didn't need a weapon powerful enough to incinerate an armored alien Leviathan. No, they just needed a weapon fast enough and dense enough to literally break the math.
Human military doctrine. Step 1. Launch hypervelocity supercavitating penetrators. Step 2. Pierce the space-time field coils in the alien hull. And Step 3. Trigger instantaneous explosive decompression. So this is the precise, absolutely brutal combat tactic the Human Alliance Navy uses to exploit that flaw. First, stealth submarines, like the Leviathan class, launch hypervelocity supercavitating torpedoes. These are tipped with ultra-dense tungsten carbide penetrators, specifically designed to resist QMS alloys. The goal here isn't to destroy the ship with a massive explosion. The goal is to physically pierce the biosilicon shell and fracture those embedded QMS field coils. Once that kinetic breach happens, the artificial inward gravity just flickers and fails.
The microseconds of a hull breach. Milliseconds, kinetic impact. Microseconds, localized field collapse. Nanoseconds, violent pressure eruption. And finally, instantaneous complete pulverization. The physics of a field coil breach unfold with just terrifying speed. Normally, if a submarine breaches underwater, it causes an implosion as water rushes in, right? Well, here, the script is completely flipped. In milliseconds, the tungsten dart impacts. In microseconds, the localized gravity field collapses. And in nanoseconds, that pent-up 1,000-bar internal pressure, which remember was only being held back by the artificial gravity, is suddenly unleashed with absolutely no counterforce. The resulting explosive decompression pulverizes the entity inside instantly. The alien craft didn't just sink. Internal counterpressure erupted outward, organic matter pulverized by its own pressurized life support. That tactical assessment is straight from the Human Alliance submarine Vanguard following the Battle of the Emperor Seamounts, and it just perfectly captures the poetic justice of this whole strategy. It highlights the brutal reality of this war. The invaders' greatest technological achievement, their godlike ability to manipulate gravity to survive literally anywhere, becomes a fatal containment bomb the very moment it's disrupted. They are crushed, quite literally, by the weight of their own survival systems.
What other godlike technologies hide fatal flaws just waiting to be exploited? It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? I mean, the Abyssal Cephalopoda arrived with tech that manipulates space-time, nullifies inertia, and completely defies atmospheric pressure. They honestly seemed like unstoppable gods. Yet, the Human Alliance proved that any system requiring immense active energy just to hold itself together is inherently fragile. It leaves us with a pretty provocative thought. In this ongoing stalemate of 3000 AD, what other godlike technologies on either side of this war are hiding fatal flaws just waiting for the exact right kinetic impact to tear them apart?